we bought a church building, not realizing that we were accidentally buying a school building. I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to running a school in any real capacity. There are people who are looking and wanting to disciple their children and raise kids with a biblical worldview. Those things matter. We don't charge our youth ministry for being part of the church, and we don't charge our children's ministry for being part of the church. Why are we charging a school that's a part of the church to be a part of the church?
If you're curious about what is trending in Christian education, you've come to the right place. Hi, I'm Delina Wallace, homeschool mom, microschool leader, and education missionary. And this is Wise and Otherwise, where we are sharing real stories from the front lines of a growing movement in Christian education. Stories of pastors, parents, and everyday believers stepping up in new ways to shape the next generation. From microschools to school boards, we'll explore how the church can lead in education again, creatively, affordably, and in true partnership with families. If you've ever wondered what role you can play, I hope these conversations help you find your next step. It is wise for the church to get involved in leading education. Otherwise, who will? Come on, Christians, let's lead the way and redeem education for the glory of God. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today for another episode of Wise and Otherwise. I have with me Pastor David Atherton from One Church in Derby. And Dave, you told me I can go ahead and call you Dave, not Pastor David. But thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. And again, as we clarifying, because we're learning it around here, One Church at Pleasant View is the name. So it's longer than that. So we just keep adding words, but yeah. So we call it OCAP.
Okay, that's helpful. One Church at Pleasant View.
There you go.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've been so inspired to hear about your efforts and your engagement in Christian education. I heard about you from a school founder. Her name's Lachelle King, and she was doing a small microschool, Cedar Point Academy, for a while, and looking and needing support, needing some extra help. And she's a believer who was really just offering quality education for kids in a small learning environment. And I'd love to hear from your side, telling us how that happened, that you reached out to her, brought her in to your church, integrated her ministry with your church ministry. And then we can talk about the other school that you were helping as well.
Sure. So with Lachelle, it was kind of, I'd love to tell you what we did. I will more tell you what I think God just kind of did on our behalf. We had been praying and really considering the possibility of getting into education in some form or fashion for a couple of years at that point. And we didn't really know, well, let me rephrase. I didn't know what I was doing. We had people at the church who maybe had ideas and clues, but, I've listened to some of your previous podcasts. You have people who have all of this wealth of experience and knowledge when it comes to education. I don't. But I do have 4 kids, and we're educating our kids. My wife and I have done homeschool, and the more that families started showing up at the church, the more we saw a need for Christian education options, whatever those options may be. And so anyways, we had kind of been on the lookout and tried a dozen different things. We threw a bunch of noodles at the wall, and none of them stuck. And it just so happened that as we were trying to figure out some plans for the church, our church, which was at the time Aviator, started kind of talking to Cedar Point. We had some conversations to see if some things would work out, and nothing really panned out there, but that was where we kind of really got to know Lachelle in earnest, as she was kind of looking for a new place to take her school. And it just so happened that around the same time we ended up selling our church building. And when we sold our church building, we bought a very old school traditional church building. You have the sanctuary underneath it. You have your fellowship hall. It was a different kind of animal. We went from a storefront to a really traditional building. But what we found was the rooms that were underneath the sanctuary we couldn't use on Sunday mornings. It was too loud. And it was an open stairwell up into the sanctuary. So if the kids were down there, it would have been too loud for us. And while we're doing worship and stuff, it would have been too loud for them. And so we had this section of the building that we couldn't use during Sundays. And we had a friend now who was looking for a place to put a school. And we kind of just recognized what I think God was already moving. And so really God aligned the pieces at the right time, so that as Lachelle was looking for somewhere to go and to take her school for her next season, that we were able to be that place. We did frantic work to redo the bathrooms down there and knock down some walls and clear out some ceiling and do everything we could do to make it work. And I think we got 90% done before she had her first day of school. So But it worked
Wow.
out really well.
That's amazing. And what was the offer or the request when you approached her? What were you thinking? Or yeah, what were you thinking?
Uh, so it's what I was thinking was, wouldn't it be neat? And so legitimately, there was really no. I mean, we had kind of talked. We got to know her a little bit. She'd gotten to know us. Really, I think the question was just, is the space available? And we said absolutely, and that was about the end of it. We didn't. I know different places do it differently. We didn't. When she came in, we brought her in under our umbrella as a church, right? And so kind of our approach to that was, if she's coming in, then she's coming in as a part of the ministry of the church. One of the things that we have really banged the drum for here that is important to us is that if we're going to do this, it's that education is ministry. And so when Lachelle came in, the question was, are we able to do this in our current situation as a church to come along and support and provide? And if so, then we're going to do it. And so that's kind of really what the conversation was.
Yeah. And what that looks like is that you are allowing her and her school and another school to use your space, and they're not being charged rent. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you guys are covering the cost of the facility.
Yeah, so we eat the cost when it comes to the building payment that we still have on the building, and the insurance and the utilities and all that. Obviously, they charge tuition for the school for the families to cover the educational cost. But we talked about it a lot, and honestly, there was some really healthy discussion at the church. We try to be pretty open in the way that we do things and make decisions, but it was not initially a uniform agreement on that. We had to have some back and forth. The question was whether or not should they pay rent, how should that relationship work? And really what I think kind of won the day, we spoke to another pastor who they had a school in their church, and they went through the same thing. And it was a phrase that he had said that kind of stuck, I think, and won the day, was, we don't charge our youth ministry for being part of the church, and we don't charge our children's ministry for being part of the church. Why are we charging a school that's a part of the church to be a part of the church?
Wow.
And so that was really, I think, kind of the argument that nobody really had an answer for.
Right.
That if we believe education is ministry, and if we think this is where God's calling our church, then we're going to support it the same way we support any other ministry in the church.
I love that. I love it. Did it take convincing of your congregation to recognize education as ministry, or were they always on board and recognized that was directly connected?
I don't know that I'd say it took convincing. It took probably some teaching, right? Of taking it to the church and explaining. But even with I remember, so it was right after we moved into that new building, we did a month of announcements. It was we had this month where it was every week there's another big announcement. And one of the announcements that we made was Lachelle coming over and bringing the school. This is obviously before the second school, which we can talk about here in a second, but before they came into the picture. But we did a video explaining what the school was and how it worked. And that was met with applause and excitement. And really the church was just kind of off and running. We've been blessed over the last, I've been here, I guess, almost 6 years. We've built, a pretty high trust environment, where I think the church is willing to trust the leadership to a degree. I mean, obviously not blind trust, but that when we say we think that this is an area of ministry that we should be involved in, and we talk about, I mean, I can't find an area of ministry that is more impactful to families than meeting the need for education. And so even if you wanted to take the altruism out of it and just said, we are the business of church and we want to reach people and have the most impact, this is the thing that has the most impact really across the board. And I mean, as a dad, if you want me to feel passionate about whatever organization you're running, take care of my kids. Right.
Oh, that's so good.
And so yeah, that was really, I think a lot of it, our church was pretty fired up about it from the get-go. And really it's just kind of blown up since then. We have a lot of ground to cover, figuring out exactly how we're doing this and, what our processes are and all that. But the church so far has been really supportive and really along for the ride.
So I admire your willingness to dive in before you had it all figured out, and to just take that step of faith, and to just, like when I was talking with you before, you mentioned like, I don't know, I'm not like an education guy, but I'm diving into this and I'm learning the ins and outs and I'm fully invested in this. What does it look like for you as you're learning the ins and outs of hosting a school and being so involved in K-12 education?
So really what it looks like for me is surrounding myself with people who do know what they're talking about. We went out, and so when both schools came, so the second school was Leap. They were kind of in a similar position, but they were a homeschool enrichment program or a hybrid homeschool group. And they basically were in the same spot. They were looking for another place, and they kind of made their way over after Lachelle. And one of the things that we realized was a need for structure and accountability, and how are we going to do this? Everybody can agree we want to teach kids and educate kids and disciple kids, and that's all great, but there's also budgets to be figured out, and there's building management to be figured out, and there's all these other things, there's curriculum and all that. And so we interviewed for a school board, and we put together a school board, and we kind of identified some pillars that we wanted to have emphasis there. One of them was education. We have some people who are lifelong educators sitting on our school board, people who have been administrators in school districts and things like that can speak to the educational component. We've got some I lovingly call them hyper bean counters, right? People who will have a sharp eye to pay attention to the budget and all of that. And so really for me, where I feel like my what I bring to the table when it comes to running a school is probably what we've already kind of addressed, which is the ability to say yes and to try to lead out to find an answer, right? And so really what I have found is really helpful is surrounding myself with people who already have ideas on the answer, so then we can fine tune and go from there. So it's really been a matter of building the team to put in support to make the thing work.
Yeah. And beforehand, we haven't mentioned that yet during the podcast here, but you told me that there were a group of ladies who were willing to serve in any way, and that when you were forming your board, it was kind of like, well, I don't know if they're the best fit for the board. But what happened with these willing ladies who wanted to somehow lend a hand and be involved in the school?
Yeah.
How did that look?
So it was as we were going through the interview process, if you've ever been a part of interviewing a team like that, you interview someone, you kind of talk, we always joke about it. Now we're going to talk about you behind your back as you leave, whatever. And there was one gal in particular who triggered this, and I'm sure she'll probably hear this at some point. Her name's Fran, but Fran was talking, and she said, she kept talking about, like, we're asking questions about what the school board's role is and this and that. And she was an educator for forever. And her whole thing was, man, I think the school board should be boots on the ground, and they should be meeting with the teachers and in the classroom and doing all this and like going through. And I was like, those are all great things to be doing, but I don't think that's what the school board is going to be doing. And it kind of, out of that conversation, there was a couple other gals too. They just had a heart for the ministry of education. And so essentially we wanted to use that, but it just didn't seem like it was the right place was on the school board, where we're going to be doing, like I said, bean counting. And so we talked to them about forming what has now become named the Bridge Team. Actually, they named it. But the Bridge Team is really, the goal is to connect the church, to bridge the church and the school together, and to bridge the school to the parents, right? And so how can we tell the stories of victory to the church about the school, right? How do we elevate the school to the church and make sure that they know what's going on and cast that as a vision of the ministry of the church? How do we reach out as we have families who are hurting or struggling? One of the gals on the Bridge Team is a counselor and a biblically certified counselor. So it's like, how can she connect with families and offer support where needed? And so really the idea there is bridging all of these different groups together in cohesive ministry so that we're not missing people in the process.
That's so beautiful. I first heard Lachelle tell me about this, and I was like, do you know what you have? Like, I don't know if you know what you have, because I've talked to so many school founders who feel alone in their efforts.
Yeah.
They don't have the support of a pastor, of an entire congregation, or a bridge team of, passionate women who want to be involved and want to serve. And don't they also help with like recruiting volunteers? And you told me an example of a specific day where they really stepped in a unique way.
Day.
Yeah.
They legitimately, that was one of the sweetest moments, I think, since we've been doing this, because there's been stress to it. Don't get me wrong. It's bringing together two different schools, and really our church has just gone through the merge of two different churches and two schools. slamming together all at the same time, really. And so there's been some learning curve issues along the way, to be sure. But we had an all hands meeting here recently, and one of the teachers that day, the end of school year, they did a big field day, and so you've got inflatables and chaos and games outside and lunch and all these kind of things. And anyways, that bridge team worked to bring in a handful of volunteers to help kind of manage that. And she said, the teacher had said, at the end of the day, we came in and like the kitchen was clean and the trash was taken out, and outside at all the places we had extra hands helping with all of the kids, and kind of got a little teary-eyed, but it was like, this was the best field day we've ever had. And that was really encouraging, I think, because we're still so new at what we're doing, to hear that like, oh, okay, there's a win, right? Like while there are bumps along the way, we're figuring it out. And I think that as long as we can all keep the same vision and the same mission and the approach to education that we're having, I think it's going to be really cool to watch it unfold.
Yeah, definitely. And when you say you're so new at this, you have had the schools in your church facility for just the spring semester, right? So 3-4 months?
We had Lachelle, and so the full-time, we've been calling it full-time and hybrid is kind of the vernacular, but the full-time kids were there this entire last academic year, so fall and spring. Okay. The hybrid homeschool, they didn't show up until I think the end of January. Okay. And it was a little bit kind of frantic, we'll call it, of like move in and go. But those two, so they were now sharing the building together on 2 different tracks and all of this. And again, the question was put to them, like, is everybody comfortable being one? It's really one school community with 2 tracks, if that makes sense. And they all said that they were. And so, like I said, we're working to figure out what that really means. And both of them, to their credit, are having to adjust to having oversight that they've never had as we're putting together a school board. And we had a meeting here recently where we talked about, for the teachers, they've always just kind of done their thing within their sphere. And it's like, now you may have people who say we can't do that because we can't afford it. And how does that look? And what is that relationship, how do we build that trust amongst all of these different groups, but who are all working to the same end?
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Wise and Otherwise. We'd like to ask you to take a minute and please rate and review our podcast so that others can learn more about us, and just to continue to show your support for this work that we're doing. It would mean so much. So please, if you're on Spotify or Apple or YouTube, take a minute and give us a good review.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, that's like a good indicator that the Lord is in this because of how it has been put together. I mean, it's the kind of thing where it's like, I couldn't have dreamed this up. I couldn't have made this happen. This is the Lord. Like, He put these pieces together. So I love the merging that's happening with the 2 schools, with the church, the new facility that you have, and then the oversight, the board, this bridge team. There's so much of the body of Christ working together, and I love the symbolism when you think of like an actual, like the human body, and how you've got the hand and the foot and the eye, and you've got all these different pieces working together so that we can function and so that we can minister to the best of our ability and to fulfill the calling that the Lord's called us to. So we've kind of skirted around these schools and mentioned them, but I'd love to talk, specifically what these schools. So we mentioned Cedar Point Academy. And this was the full-time school, but it was a smaller version. Like, it was kind of somewhat of a microschool. And then we have LEAP, which was homeschool enrichment hybrid model with part-time classes. So tell me what those programs, so we know what they were kind of like in the past, but now that are they also merged under your umbrella in the church? And so are they one school?
Yeah. So now, again, it's been chaos for about 6 months, let me tell you. But yeah, so those 2 schools have come in with different educational approaches. They are both now collectively One Learning Academy is what they're called. Okay. So what was Cedar Point, what was LEAP, are now working together as One Learning Academy. So kind of the cool part about that, well, actually, there's a lot of cool parts about it, but one of the cool parts about it is the support that I think those two schools can offer one another as one community now, right? And so some of that we're seeing play out. So next year, the hybrid side, they will be offering essentially one day of what. This is probably, again, my lack of being an educational person, but I would call core classes, but they're basic curriculum that they're working through. And then on Thursdays, they're going to be doing electives where they have done a fantastic job of building out this system of elective classes that they've been doing for the last several years. But what's cool about that is that the full-time side will be joining them for elective classes. And so they'll be getting, more kids than just the small class that they're in or whatever on the full-time side. And so we have that as kind of a joint community program where two schools are able to work together. On the full-time side, they have our director, who will be working largely with the full-time side, and also Lachelle, who's an educator there. They both have master's degrees with emphasis in dyslexia. And so one of the things we've talked about is on the hybrid side, when you're doing homeschool, you may be a family and you say, we don't have the ability to deal with some of the educational needs that we have. Well, we have teachers who have been lifelong educators attached to the school, and we'll be setting up a referral program where it's like, oh, if your kid is struggling with dyslexia, even though we're doing hybrid school, you can still work with these teachers as part of the educational support that we're trying to extend to the families. And so coming together, it's one school, it is one learning academy, right? But it is two distinctly different tracks of school. And really for us, I don't know, I guess maybe as a pastor and as a dad and as somebody who has a lot of friends in the community who are trying to figure out what to do with their families for schooling, my family, we couldn't afford private Christian education. We have 4 boys and pastor salary. I didn't get into ministry because of the bank, let me tell you, but so we couldn't do that. And so homeschool was the option that made the most sense for us. Right. There are some people who, they both parents work and they want Christian education, but they do not feel called to homeschool whatsoever. And so for them, they need a full-time educational option, but they're not comfortable for whatever reason with public school or whatever their issues may be. And so really the thing that was so appealing about this was we could bring 2 distinct models together and bring them under one roof in one educational community. One quick thing too, sorry, I'm talking a long time on this one, but we have one family in particular I'm thinking of who has 4 children, and they had 2 kids who the homeschooling was a grind, right? And 2 who are really responding well to it. And so next year they're able to put 2 students in the full-time side and 2 students in the hybrid side, but they're still part of the school community. And so it's just a really, I think, unique approach. So
that is really great. So I have 6 kids and they will be attending 3 different schools. So what works best for my oldest isn't really the best fit for my next 2. And then I'm homeschooling my younger 3 still. So I homeschooled all of them. But as they got to a certain age, it was like, oh, okay, this is working really well for this one. These guys need this. But let me just tell you, trying to navigate 3 different schools and their schedules and the communication and keeping track of everything, it is a bit exhausting in itself. I'm happy for the options though. I really am. So I love how you're able to incorporate what the families need, and they can kind of pick and choose 2 different tracks, 2 avenues. So I think it's interesting too, because when we talked on the phone earlier, it didn't sound like it's not like you had this vision beforehand of what needed to happen, and then you've been able to make it happen. It's kind of like you've just been open-handed and willing and obedient. And then the Lord's told you what's going to happen, I'm bringing this to you and I'm bringing this to you. So this is how it's going to be, oftentimes, when we think of something, we're like, the Lord lays something on our heart and we have this vision and we're kind of like, but how, Lord, how will this ever happen? And then he just kind of brought it to you before you even thought that these 2 tracks or whatever.
Yeah, the fun part about that is honestly, there were several times where we were trying to figure stuff out before this and it fell flat. It's fun now. This season is a lot of fun, but there was a lot of failures along the way trying to figure out what the plan was. We knew that, again, to us, the bedrock foundations, education is ministry, and we wanted to provide options. We didn't know what that meant. And yeah, when the timing was right. So we obviously talked about the churches merging. So our church, the church that I was at, Aviator, sold its building and moved to this small building that we moved into that we were excited about, and it got us largely out of debt, and that was really great. Well, then when the church merged, we've been joking about it. Said we bought a church building, not realizing that we were accidentally buying a school building, right? And so we've actually been able to leave that building completely and have an entire dedicated space just for these two schools to come in and form one new educational option. And none of that could have possibly been part of our plan, right? All the things that have happened here, it's been so wild just watching God put the jigsaw pieces together. As really, I think what I think we've tried to do well is just say yes in advance and trust that when the opportunity presents itself, we'll be ready for it.
Yeah.
And we're trying.
That's so great. That's so great. So your congregation or both of these churches, were there a lot of young families already, or was it an older congregation? What did it look like, and how has that shifted now that you're working more with families in these schools? Has anything changed in the demographic?
So it's a little bit of best of both worlds, really. So largely, and this is an oversimplification, but largely one church, which was the new name that we had taken on after Aviator, was a younger congregation with a lot of families. Pleasant View Baptist Church, which has been kind of a stalwart here in Derby for the last 70 years, 69, 70 years, they were an older congregation, but they had a passion to reach the next generation. And we really had a desire to be an intergenerational church. One of the things we talk about a lot is being a Titus II church, which is where the challenge from Paul there is that the older should be teaching the youngers or training up the youngers. And so if you're a church that's full of young people, it's really hard to have the older people investing in them. If you're a church of only old people, what's the next generation that you're reaching? And so the merge really brought that together in a really, I think, beautiful way, harmonious way. And so that we now are kind of an intergenerational church. And that's one of the things that we've seen as we're looking to start recruiting volunteers for the school, right? For people to come and help monitor the lunchroom or do reading time with kids or whatever, is that now we have a bunch of people who are in that older generation, who are retired, but who are passionate about it. We have a couple in our church who's been leading out a program called Intentional Grandparenting. And so it's really about challenging that generation. It's not time to tap out. It's time to get involved. And so bring some perspective to the table that a lot of these younger families just don't have. And so it's, again, at this point, it has been such a beautiful thing to watch as the church, the strengths of one has meshed so well with the strengths of the other. And in the schools, the format of one has meshed so well with the format of the other that I think we're kind of, again, I don't want to say we're building anything, because man alive, I don't feel like I've done anything. I don't feel like we've done nothing, but God has just put the pieces in place to create an opportunity for a really powerful ministry here.
Do you feel like this is something that other churches can do?
Yes, I think maybe not this exact thing, right? But again, we didn't know that we were doing this exact thing. I do think churches can say yes. I think that churches have the ability to do whatever they can do up front. I don't know that I've ever been a part of a church, just as an example, that as I've been in ministry, every church I've ever been at has had some person or a group of people who are passionate about education in some way, shape, or form, right? Somebody who's wanting to start a homeschool group or a study day or whatever. Like, as you find the heart of your people, I guess maybe for pastors, I would encourage them with this. I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to running a school in any real capacity. I'm trying to learn it, right? But there are people within my church who do. And so to empower them and equip them to do that is outreach. It is missions. It is ministry, and it's impactful ministry at that. And so I think really churches may come up with a different way to skin the cat, right, so to speak. But I think all churches have the ability to say yes and to say that we feel called to this. And I do think that there is it's a need for your families. There are people who are looking and wanting to disciple their children and raise kids with a biblical worldview. Those things matter. And I think it was a Vodi Bakum quote I heard back in the day, but if we send our kids to Caesar, then we can't be surprised when they become Romans, right? That there is some level on which if we take a hands-off approach to educating and discipling our kids, then, I mean, we can't be shocked when 80+% fall away as soon as they get out of the home.
Right. Right. No, that's a good message. That's really good. I'd love to hear, were there any particular barriers, or what do you feel like from a pastor's perspective, as other pastors might want to engage and think about this and maybe explore their opportunities? What do you feel like is the major, like, are there hurdles that everyone can expect and anticipate? And then how did you address those?
Yeah. So definitely there's hurdles, and we're experiencing them now as we're trying to navigate a lot of different things being brought together under one roof. I think obviously there's some logistical hurdles, things like space, things like funny, financial or money, as one might call it. But there's, obviously, when we started this process, we were still mired in debt and hurting financially. And so there were some serious financial constraints that we couldn't put forward the money that would be needed to really probably do it and do it well. And so I think really recognizing that those obstacles are going to be or that they're going to be in your path or something you're going to have to overcome. I think it's really a matter of looking at it and asking the question, well, is this a ministry that God has called us to? And if so, then there are answers to each one of these problems. There are ways to overcome each one of these obstacles. And it's going to look different. I think this is the thing that has been really clear just from our path through this process. Those answers will be different for every church because God's going to meet the need in different ways. Mm-hmm. But I do think on some level, you don't want to be reckless, right? You don't want to be careless or frivolous. You want to be good stewards. And yet, I feel like God has called the church to do ministry. And so I think that if you really feel like this is where God is calling your church, and I think probably more churches need to get into the game, then you have to trust that those obstacles are going to be overcome. The other, I think, big one that we've faced is just, again, building trust, right? With the church, building trust with the school, building trust with accounting and finance and all that. And really there's no short answer to that. It's just, you have to be trustworthy over time, right? Mm-hmm. You have to show that you're going to be good stewards, that you're going to take risk when risk is appropriate, and you're going to be reserved when reservation is appropriate, that you're going to find the times and the opportunities to take calculated risks and to do it well.
Yeah, I love how you said that not everyone's answer is going to be the same. No, we're not all going to solve the problems in the same way. And I think that's something that we need to embrace a little bit more. And the church needs to embrace that creative side. Our Father is the creator, and we are image bearers of his, and we are creative. He made us to be creative. And we can think outside of the box. We can think of creative solutions. He will gift us with that. He will give us that wisdom when we need it. Mm-hmm. And I think he likes to surprise us and kind of do things out of the ordinary. He is not an ordinary God. And we shouldn't feel like we're constrained and we're set, as a church, like, oh, well, here's our 4 walls and here's our Sunday day and here's our youth ministry and children's ministry. Like, it's so much more than that. And there's so much potential if we allow him to breathe what I feel like is just like this fresh wave, this fresh life into our ministries and our churches. And we'll see that overflow into our communities. So I'm really excited. I just love to hear these examples. And I really appreciate your strong leadership and example to other churches and pastors of just being willing and saying yes, and just let the Lord lead and trust him and build that trust in your community and elsewhere. But that happens by taking these steps of faith, and in obedience. And he's not going to fail us or let us down. He's going to give us the wisdom we need. I'm really excited to hear about what you have. Is there any final word or anything, a word of encouragement that you'd like to share with pastors or families who are wondering or learning about this for the first time?
I think really, if there's one other thing I would share, it would just be, as we have gone through this process, again, I don't want people to listen to this and be like, oh, it works so perfectly for them. Because it really hasn't. There has been bumps. There have been challenges. There's been difficulties. I mean, we just walked through the building today and piled up the tens of thousands of dollars worth of projects at the building that we need to be doing. And it's like, whew, I don't know how we're going to get all this stuff done. There are all these things. And yet, looking back, and this is when you have the advantage of hindsight, right? It I think strengthens your faith a little bit, because looking back, we can see that all of these times where there were hurdles that popped up, and when we thought it this way, I don't know how we're going to get past this one. There's no way we're going to get past this one. And you look back and you just see God's provision and you see God's faithfulness. And so I think that really it's one of those things of if one of the, we talked about the barriers, if the primary first barrier is fear of starting, then I think you can cast that one aside. I think God is bigger than whatever obstacle that you have put in your imagination that is the thing that is going to stop your church from being able to step into this space. And I think, again, the beauty of it is we're getting to see now on the back end families who have the ability now to disciple their children in a way that they didn't have, 12 months ago. And it feels really great to be a part of that. And I think that's what ministry is. We've been invited to be a part of what God's doing. It's not what we're doing. It's what God is doing. And we get to be a part of that. And so, man alive, if you're going to miss on trying to be a part of it.
That's so great. Good word. I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation. I am very hopeful and excited about what's happening. Do you happen to have the website handy for One Learning Academy? Do you know where parents can go if they are interested?
Yes, I do. It's oladerby.com. OLA
Perfect.
is in One Learning Academy, derby.com.
Perfect. Okay. Well, so nice to have this conversation. I appreciate it. And thank you to our listeners for joining us today. And we'll see you next time for our next episode of Wise and Otherwise.